Tired of having those unfulfilling situationships? In this video, you're going to learn the simple, but sometimes hard to do practice of building more fulfilling relationships. We're going to explore the roots of your relationship anxiety, breaking down your relationship needs, and how to build a more fulfilling relationship. I'm Brandon the Dom. Let's dive in. Now, most people are afraid of expressing their needs and having them rejected. This is what I believe is the reason that situationships continue to exist. It's not fear of commitment, but rather a fear of committing to unspoken expectations. Those being needs that were never stated explicitly, but yet are now expected to be met. When people are not given the chance to exercise their agency in saying yes or no to meeting those needs, they feel trapped. Now let's back up for a second. First, let's kind of define what a situationship is. A situationship occurs when two people engage in sexual and emotional intimacy in a compartmentalized way. When they're together, they may maintain a connection, whether that just be strictly sexual or have an emotional component. But when they're apart, they don't prioritize the relationship in their time commitments. They don't do any future planning, and they don't really take the other person's needs into consideration when making decisions. They're just basically going about their life. What can happen in these situationships is anxiety starts to develop due to the lack of stability and consistency, especially when one of the partners starts to develop expectations and the other one is not committing fully to those expectations. Now, to alleviate this, there's some people that believe you need to now put a label onto the relationship. But I actually think that's misdirected energy. See, the anxiety in the situationship does not stem from uncertainty about what to call the relationship. It comes from deeper concerns. And those concerns deal with needs, which you potentially want to have fulfilled by this relationship that currently are not being fulfilled. The second is whether you can actually rely upon that person to fulfill your needs now and in the future. And third is that that person might refuse to want to meet those needs or leave the relationship entirely. So instead of being vulnerable and directly asking for our needs to be met, we often rely on labels to set expectations without us having to say anything. However, this places an unfair burden on our partners because they're suddenly expected to fulfill numerous needs just because a label's put on it. So what exactly are those needs? What are we trying to expect of our partner when we're putting a label on the relationship? Well, consider for a moment what you think your boyfriend or girlfriend should do. Your list might include being emotionally and sexually exclusive, introducing them to family and friends, providing emotional support during hardship, spending multiple days a week together, and many, many, many more assumptions. Each of these is an individual need or desire. Instead of bundling them together under a single label of boyfriend or girlfriend, your need should actually be expressed and asked of your partner if they would be willing to fulfill that need. When you ask somebody to be your boyfriend or ask them to be your girlfriend, you're implicitly asking them to commit to fulfilling an unknown number of needs. And that can be overwhelming. So instead, take the time to actually identify what you need from the relationship. Let's just say that you have 10 core needs. You can then ask your partner whether they're willing to fulfill each one of those. And their response might be yes to 6 of those needs, yes under certain conditions to 2 of those, and no to the other 2 remaining. That's just an example. At this point, your partner is now likely to express their own needs, and you'll have the opportunity to choose what you're willing to fulfill. Now, if you refuse to fulfill many of their needs, don't be surprised if they're not willing to meet yours either. But if you're willing to compromise, to work together, you're going to build a more fulfilling relationship without even needing a label and dragging in all those unspoken expectations of what that label should look like. Now let's address the elephant in the room that's a need for many relationships, which is monogamy. In traditional relationships, becoming a boyfriend or girlfriend implies exclusivity. If monogamy is important to you, that's completely valid. But it is something that you still need to explicitly ask for because your partner may not be ready for exclusivity or they may never want it. It's at that point that you have to decide whether you can continue this relationship without that need being met. Now, the same thing applies to open relationships as well. If your desire is non-monogamy, then you need to communicate that need as well. Your partner has the right to accept or decline, and you have the choice of how to proceed based on their response. Ultimately, it's the ambiguity about needs that make relationships unfulfilling, not the absence of a label. But your question still might be, well, what do we call it? Labels do serve a purpose. They convey information to others. However, labels often carry much more social expectations than actual representations of what the dynamic between you and your partner is. But of course, you still have to navigate society, your friends, your family, the culture, everything else. So what do you call this other person that you're seeing? I prefer to use the term partner, and I'm pretty sure I've used it a bunch during this video. Because the beauty of partner is its ambiguity. Whether somebody is a once-in-a-while sexual companion or a long-term significant other, the term still applies. When others hear that, they're more likely to ask, what does that mean? Instead of assuming predefined expectations. This opens the door for you to explain your relationship in your own terms to the extent that you actually feel comfortable doing so. You really don't owe anybody else an explanation. But this also brings another elephant in the room, which is the need to feel special. Particularly in non-monogamy, some people want a label in order to make a distinction between them and the other partners, in order to feel unique and special to that one relationship. This need to feel special is also entirely valid. However, rather than relying on a label, a more meaningful approach is to nurture each relationship individually by discussing and honoring the unique needs in that relationship. A specific label doesn't make a relationship more special. Being intentional and communicating does. So with those things in mind, let's discuss how to build a more fulfilling relationship. If you find yourself in an unfulfilling situationship, or any relationship for that matter, consider this approach. First, identify the specific needs that you want fulfilled. And then second is ask your partner directly, would you be willing to fulfill, insert your need? If they say yes, express gratitude, go about your merry way. If they say no, then you kind of have to start negotiating, finding alternative ways to meet that need, or determine whether the relationship is still viable if that need goes unmet. And if that need is unmet for a long enough time, you have to decide whether that relationship is worth continuing. Now, because it was simple to list those things out, it's not an easy process. It requires emotional vulnerability, but it's far better than using a label to communicate unspoken expectations. Yes, this approach does require emotional maturity, and that too may be a need that you prioritize in your relationships. This is and always will be the real work of relationships. So whether you've just started seeing someone or you've been seeing them for years, early and frequent conversations about expectations and needs are what sets a stronger foundation for a more fulfilling connection. Now, if incompatibility is happening in your relationship and this is something you're struggling to fix, I created this video on 3 ways to fix a sexually incompatible relationship, but the details that I go on in that video apply to many other incompatibility of needs. So check that video out, and thank you so much for your time and attention.